A poor boy saved an old millionaire's life on the street, and he promised to repay the boy. However, a few days later, he suddenly sent the boy to a detention camp. The old man stumbled forward, his hands reaching out for something, anything, to steady himself. But there was nothing. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the bench with a heavy exhale, his breath shallow, his skin waxy pale beneath the unforgiving afternoon sun. People walked past, glancing briefly before turning away, their indifference as suffocating as the heat pressing down on the pavement. Jason saw it happen. He had been moving swiftly between parked cars, his small hands fishing out discarded plastic bottles wedged between curbs and tires, his focus only breaking when the old man faltered. For a moment, he hesitated. The city had its own unspoken rules. Don't stop, don't look too long, and above all, don't get involved. But then the man's trembling fingers clutched at the air, his body slumping forward, and Jason felt something stir inside him. He knew this was a condition of hypoglycemia that adults often suffer from. He tightened his grip on the few coins he had just earned from the recycling shop. Not much, enough for a small piece of bread, but not enough for Gloria to have extra. His stomach was already a hollow ache, but hunger was something he had learned to ignore. He turned toward the store without another thought. The shop's air conditioning was a sharp contrast to the sweltering heat outside, but Jason barely noticed. His eyes locked onto the cheapest carton of milk he could find. He pressed his coins onto the counter, feeling the cashier's brief glance at his tattered clothes before she wordlessly rang up his purchase. By the time he got back, the man's breathing had turned labored. Jason crouched down, holding out the carton. "Here," he said, peeling the cap open and tilting it gently toward the old man's lips. "Drink this." The man hesitated for only a second before taking a small sip, then another. His fingers, unsteady at first, tightened around the carton as warmth slowly returned to his expression. Jason watched him carefully. "You okay?" he asked after a moment. The old man blinked, his grey eyes finally focusing. He looked down at Jason, really looked at him, taking in the boy's oversized second-hand shirt clinging to his thin frame, the holes in his sneakers and the dirt caked beneath his fingernails. But it was his face that struck him most, not the grime, not the sunburned cheeks, but the sharp alertness in his eyes, the way they carried exhaustion far too old for a child his age. "You bought this?" The man's voice was hoarse, his fingers tightening slightly around the carton. Jason shrugged. "You needed it." The old man exhaled, his hands no longer trembling. He sat up straighter, color slowly returning to his skin. He looked at Jason again, something flickering behind his eyes. "What's your name, son?" Jason hesitated. He had learned not to hand out details so easily, but there was something about this man, something that didn't feel threatening. "Jason." A nod. "I'm Patrick Guzman." Jason didn't react to the name, though he had heard it before. He didn't care much for the lives of men who wore expensive watches and rode in black cars with tinted windows. He had no use for their names. Patrick reached into his pocket, pulling out a crisp bill and holding it toward Jason. "For the milk," he said. Jason stared at it. A single bill, more than he had seen in weeks. With that, he could get Gloria something warm to eat. He could stretch it for days, and yet he shook his head. "You needed it," Jason repeated, his voice steady. Then, before the man could insist, he pushed himself up, wiping his hands on his jeans. Patrick studied him, intrigued. "If you ever need anything," he said, pulling a small card from his pocket, "come find me. It has home address on it." Jason took it, glancing at the address printed in neat, expensive lettering. He wouldn't use it, but he didn't throw it away either. He gave Patrick a small nod and turned, slipping back into the city's restless flow, his thin frame swallowed by the moving crowd. Patrick watched him go, a strange feeling curling in his chest. He had met many people in his lifetime, Powerful men, desperate men, and dishonest men. But this boy had nothing, and still he had given. The streets were quieter now, the evening rush having settled into a restless hum. A distant siren wailed, swallowed by the layered noise of the city. Car horns, muffled music from an open window, a dog barking somewhere far off. The air was thick with heat, though the night had begun to creep in, bringing with it a slow, stale wind that carried the scent of rain, yet to fall. Jason walked quickly, his small frame slipping through the shadows of crumbling buildings, his hands clutching the thin loaf of bread he had managed to buy. The city had its own way of eroding things. Buildings, people, hope. He had learned that much. The apartment door creaked when he pushed it open. The air inside was worse than outside, thick and unmoving, laced with the faint stench of cigarette smoke and something rotten. The light bulb above flickered, casting weak, sporadic glows over the peeling wallpaper. A small voice called to him from the corner. "Jason?" Gloria. She was huddled on the couch, a thin blanket wrapped around her small frame, her hair tangled from sleep. She blinked up at him, her expression flickering between relief and expectation. Jason forced a smile, stepping inside, lifting the loaf slightly as if it were some great prize. "Look what I got," he said, keeping his tone light. Gloria's face lit up, but she didn't move until Jason sat down beside her. He broke the bread carefully, giving her the larger half without hesitation. She hesitated, eyeing it, but Jason nudged her hand. "Eat." She ate slowly, deliberately, as if making each bite last longer. Jason leaned back against the torn fabric of the couch, exhaustion settling into his bones. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the seam of his jeans, where the small, crumpled card Patrick had given him lay tucked away in his pocket. He hadn't thought about it much since shoving it there, but now, with Gloria eating beside him, with the flickering light and the gnawing hunger in his own stomach, his mind drifted to it. A way out. Maybe. But he wasn't ready to believe in things like that. A loud crash shattered the fragile quiet. Gloria flinched, her body going stiff, fingers tightening around the piece of bread still in her hand. Jason was already standing, his muscles tensed. The door slammed open, bouncing against the wall. Isabella stumbled inside. Her eyes were wild, rimmed red, her hair sticking to her forehead. She swayed where she stood, hands trembling at her sides. The reek of sweat and alcohol clung to her like a second skin. Jason instinctively stepped in front of Gloria, his heart hammering. "Where is it?" Isabella's voice was raw, broken at the edges. She staggered forward, kicking over an empty beer bottle near the door. It rolled across the floor, clinking against the leg of the table. "Where's what?" Jason forced his voice to stay even. Isabella's gaze snapped to him, unfocused yet piercing. "Money!" she hissed. "I know you have some!" Jason's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Keith had been here 2 days ago, yelling outside their door, demanding something from her. Jason hadn't caught all the words, but he understood the tone, the weight behind it. Isabella took a shaky step forward, then another. Her fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. Jason didn't move. "I don't have anything," he said steadily. A beat of silence. Then Isabella's expression twisted. "Liar!" she screamed, and swung her arm toward the table, knocking a glass bottle off its surface. It shattered on impact, pieces scattering across the floor. Gloria whimpered. Jason heard it and felt the tiny movement of her body shrinking behind him. Something in him snapped. "You're scaring her," he said, voice sharper now. Isabella's eyes darted past him to Gloria, something flickering there, something almost human, before it collapsed into something uglier. She made a sound, a strangled, frustrated noise, and collapsed onto the couch, her body shaking. Her withdrawal was setting in hard now. Jason stayed where he was, feet rooted to the floor. The room was still, except for Isabella's shallow, uneven breaths. The broken glass glinted under the weak light, fragments scattered near Jason's feet. Gloria pressed closer to him. Jason's fingers curled around the crumpled piece of paper in his pocket. He had always believed he could handle things, that he could keep Gloria safe, keep them both fed, survive whatever storms came their way. But tonight, as he looked at his mother sinking deeper into her addiction, as he felt the sharp edges of glass near his shoes and the weight of Gloria's small frame behind him, something in him shifted. Maybe it was time to stop believing that survival meant staying. His grip tightened around the card. It was time. Jason's breath came fast and shallow as he stepped out into the night, Gloria limp in his arms. Her small fingers clung to the collar of his shirt, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, her warmth the only thing anchoring him. The streets stretched ahead, empty and endless, their shadows yawning beneath flickering streetlights. The air was heavy, thick with the lingering scent of spilled beer and cigarette smoke from the apartment. Jason barely noticed. His legs carried him forward, his grip firm around his sister, each step fueled by something deeper than fear, something raw, something desperate. The card in his pocket burned against his palm. He swallowed hard. Patrick Guzman. The address was scrawled in neat, deliberate print. He had nothing left to lose. A few blocks down, a woman stood near the curb, waiting for the bus. Her purse rested against her hip, her eyes scanning the road. But when Jason approached, a boy too small to be carrying another child, his face streaked with sweat and fear, she hesitated. "Excuse me," Jason said, his voice hoarse. "Do you know how to get to this address?" He unfolded the crumpled card, holding it out with unsteady fingers. The woman took it, her brows furrowing as she read. Her lips parted slightly, and something unreadable flickered across her face before she looked back at him, studying him in the dim light. "You sure about this, kid?" she asked, glancing at Gloria. "This is a rich neighborhood. People there. They don't usually open doors for kids like us." Jason didn't flinch. "I have to go." The woman exhaled sharply but pointed down the road. "Walk straight 3 blocks. Take a right. Keep going until you see the big houses. You'll know when you get there." Jason nodded, his grip adjusting around Gloria as she stirred against him. The woman hesitated again. "Listen, if they turn you away, don't let it get to you." Her voice softened, like she already knew the answer to a question he hadn't asked. "Some places weren't built for kids like you." Jason squared his shoulders. "I have to try." She nodded once, then stepped back, watching as he disappeared into the night. The change was almost immediate. The cracked sidewalks and rusted fences gave way to clean, paved streets. The air smelled different, like trimmed hedges and polished stone, like a world far removed from the one Jason knew. Houses loomed on either side, too big, too perfect, their windows glowing softly like the pages of a book he'd never been allowed to touch. He slowed. The contrast was sharp and jarring. He had spent his whole life in places where people barely looked at each other, where every door had an extra lock, where the streets smelled of oil and sweat. But here, the world felt untouched, pristine in a way that made Jason feel like he didn't belong. His eyes landed on the house at the end of the street. It was massive, not just big, but a kind of big that made no sense to him. The gates were high, made of iron, curling in decorative loops at the top. Beyond them, the house stood in quiet elegance, its lights warm against the night, its windows tall and perfect. Jason hesitated at the gate. What if Patrick didn't remember him? What if he had just been saying something nice, the way people did when they didn't actually expect you to show up? His fingers tightened around Gloria. He didn't have another plan. Jason pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed beyond the gate, too soft, too refined, like even the sound itself had never known urgency. Jason shifted his weight, his stomach coiling with doubt. Maybe they should turn around. Maybe they could find a different place to sleep. even just for tonight. For a long moment, nothing. Then the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open, warm light spilling into the night. Patrick stood there, his robe loosely tied, eyes slightly narrowed from the remnants of sleep, his silver hair slightly tousled. His gaze landed on Jason first, the way he clutched Gloria, the exhaustion painted across his face, the sharp, wary look in his eyes that didn't belong to a child. Then Patrick's gaze softened. He stepped aside without a word. "Come in." Jason didn't move at first. His legs had carried him this far, but now, standing on the threshold of something he didn't understand, something foreign and terrifying, he suddenly felt small. Patrick waited. Then Gloria whimpered softly, her fingers twitching against Jason's shirt. That was all it took. Jason stepped inside. The warmth hit him first. It wrapped around him, easing into his skin like something forgotten and unfamiliar. The air smelled of something Jason couldn't quite place. Fresh linen, polished wood, something rich and inviting. Gloria stirred, her small face pressing against his shoulder as she blinked blearily at the room. Her eyes widened. Everything was too big. The ceilings stretched higher than Jason had ever seen. The furniture was untouched by time, and the floor beneath his feet was clean and smooth. A fireplace flickered in the corner, casting a golden glow over the leather couches and framed paintings lining the walls. A world completely different from their own. Jason's grip tightened on Gloria as he shifted from foot to foot. He felt like an intruder. Patrick's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sit down." Jason hesitated. Patrick sighed, rubbing a hand over his face before turning toward the hallway. "I'll get some blankets." The weight of the night pressed down on Jason all at once. He hadn't realized how heavy his limbs felt, how much his body ached, how the hunger had settled into something dull but constant in his stomach. He sank onto the couch, careful with Gloria as she curled against him. Patrick returned minutes later, setting a tray down, food, water, and blankets draped over his arm. Jason stared at it. Patrick caught the look. "It's for you." Jason didn't move. Patrick sat down across from him, watching, waiting. "You don't have to stay," he said after a moment, "but you do have to eat." Jason hesitated, then reached out slowly. The first bite nearly unraveled him. The warmth spread down his throat, settling into his stomach. Something solid, something real. He hadn't realized how tightly he had been holding himself together until now. Gloria was already dozing against his side, her breathing even. Jason fought to keep his eyes open. Patrick said nothing as the boy surrendered to the first real safety he had felt in years. Outside, the city stretched on, indifferent as always. But for the first time, Jason had stepped beyond it. And for the first time, someone had let him in. The scent of something warm and familiar drifted through the air, wrapping itself around Jason before he even opened his eyes. His body was reluctant to wake, weighed down by the unfamiliar comfort of a soft couch and by the exhaustion that still clung to his limbs. He blinked slowly, the morning light filtering through the large windows, painting golden streaks across the polished floor. For a moment he forgot where he was. Then he heard it, the faint clatter of dishes, the low hum of a stove, the quiet shuffle of footsteps in a house far too big to belong to him. Jason sat up abruptly. Gloria was still curled up beside him, her small form buried under a thick blanket, her breathing even. She looked peaceful in a way she never had before, her face relaxed, her fingers no longer clenching at her sleeves like she did when she was scared. Jason turned toward the sound, his muscles tensed, ready for whatever came next. The kitchen was open, connected to the grand living room where he had slept, and standing there, sleeves rolled up, was Patrick, cooking. Jason frowned. For all the stories he had heard about rich people, none of them had involved a millionaire standing over a stovetop, spatula in hand, flipping eggs like he had done it 100 times before. Jason lingered near the edge of the room, not stepping forward, but not retreating either. Patrick must have sensed him because he glanced over his shoulder, giving him a brief nod. "Morning," he said simply, as if this were just another day, as if Jason and Gloria belonged here, waking up in his house like they had nowhere else to be. Jason didn't know how to respond, so he said nothing. Patrick turned back to the stove, unfazed. "There's coffee if you want," Patrick added, motioning toward the counter. "Or orange juice." Jason stared at the clean ceramic mugs and the glass pitcher filled with juice that looked fresher than anything he had ever seen in his mother's fridge. The choices felt like too much. Patrick didn't push. Instead, he plated the eggs, setting 2 extra plates on the counter. Toast, eggs, something that smelled rich and buttery. Too much food for just one person. Jason felt his stomach tighten, not from hunger, but from something else. Patrick finally turned to him, his sharp eyes softer than the night before. "Sit," he said. Jason hesitated. He had learned over time that kindness came with conditions. That offer of food and warmth often led to something being expected in return. And yet, Patrick hadn't asked anything of him. Not when he showed up at his door, not when he hesitated before stepping inside, not when he had fallen asleep without meaning to. Jason glanced at Gloria, still asleep. For her, he sat. The first bite was overwhelming. Not because of the taste, though it was better than anything he had eaten in weeks, but because of what it meant. He was here, in a house that wasn't his, eating food that wasn't meant for him, in the presence of a man who should have turned him away, but hadn't. Patrick poured himself coffee, leaning against the counter. He didn't start with questions. Instead, he took a sip and said, "You want to tell me how you ended up here?" Jason's grip on his fork tightened. He had never told anyone, not fully, bits and pieces maybe. People saw things, they assumed things, but no one had ever asked outright. No one had ever cared enough to wait for an answer. Jason swallowed hard. For a moment, he considered lying, saying that everything was fine, that he didn't need help, that he and Gloria would be gone by nightfall. But his ribs still ached from the weight of hunger, his hands still shook from exhaustion, and for the first time in a long time, someone had let him in. So he told the truth. About the nights spent waiting for a mother who didn't come home. About the yelling in the hallway, the men who showed up and demanded things Jason didn't understand. About Gloria clinging to him in the dark, her little hands trembling against his. About Keith. About the way Isabella had stopped being a mother and started being someone Jason didn't recognize. About the glass bottle shattering. About realizing that survival didn't mean staying. He didn't look at Patrick as he spoke. When he finished, the room was quiet. Jason risked a glance up. Patrick's expression was unreadable, but his grip on his coffee mug had tightened, his knuckles white against the porcelain. Jason braced himself. For judgment. For disbelief. For the moment when Patrick would shake his head and tell him that none of it was his problem. Instead, Patrick exhaled slowly, his gaze settling on Jason with something that almost looked like understanding. "You took care of your sister," he said. Jason swallowed. "I had to." Patrick nodded once, as if that was all the explanation he needed. Then he set his coffee down, reaching for his phone. Jason's stomach lurched. He knew that look. He had seen it before, on teachers, on caseworkers, on neighbors who got involved when they shouldn't have. "What are you doing?" Jason asked, suddenly on edge. Patrick didn't hesitate. "Calling the police." Jason's chest tightened, his hands curled into fists. "Number no," Jason said, standing up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "You can't." Patrick didn't react. He just met Jason's panicked gaze with a steady one. "Jason," he said, voice calm but firm, "your mother is an addict. Your sister is 6 years old. You came here because you had nowhere else to go. If I don't call, what happens when you leave? Where do you go?" Jason's breath hitched. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He had only been thinking about getting out. Patrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. I know you don't trust people like me. I don't blame you. But this isn't about me, or you. It's about her. His eyes flickered toward Gloria, still sleeping soundly on the couch. She deserves better than this. Jason's shoulders were stiff, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Patrick could hear it. I can't go back, Jason said, his voice barely above a whisper. You won't. Jason flinched at how sure Patrick sounded. He wanted to believe him, but trust was something he couldn't afford. Patrick sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, he said, softer now. You don't have to do this alone. You shouldn't have had to in the first place. Jason stared at him. His whole life, he had been the one taking care of things, fixing things, carrying things. No one had ever said that he didn't have to. His fingers twitched. His throat felt tight. Patrick picked up the phone. Jason didn't stop him. The call was made. Jason didn't move as Patrick spoke to the dispatcher, his voice calm and steady, like he had done this before, like he knew exactly what needed to be said. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just quiet authority wrapped in careful words. Jason's stomach twisted. He should have stopped him. He should have snatched the phone away, grabbed Gloria, and run. But where would they go? Back to the apartment, where the walls reeked of alcohol and old regret. Back to the streets, where every step was a gamble. Patrick set the phone down, his gaze flickering toward Jason. They're sending someone, he said simply. Jason forced himself to nod, though his hands remained clenched into fists at his sides. Gloria stirred then, her small face scrunching as she shifted beneath the blanket. Jason moved instinctively, kneeling beside her as she blinked up at him, still half lost in sleep. Jace? Her voice was thick and groggy. He smoothed a hand over her hair. It's okay, he murmured. Go back to sleep. She yawned, nodding, her body curling back into the warmth of the couch. Patrick watched them in silence. A knock at the door cut through the air. Jason went rigid. Patrick stood, his movements unhurried. That'll be them. The next few minutes blurred. 2 officers entered, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other younger, softer in the eyes, followed by a woman in a navy coat, clipboard in hand, hair tied back in a neat bun. She introduced herself as Betty Cox, from Child Protective Services. Jason hated her on sight. She looked at him the way all the others had, like she had already decided who he was before he even spoke. He swallowed hard, shifting slightly to block Gloria from view. Jason and Gloria, right? Betty's voice was gentle, practiced. I'd like to talk to you, if that's okay. Jason didn't answer. Patrick stepped in. I called because these kids needed help, he said, crossing his arms. Not to have them thrown into some system that doesn't give a damn. Betty's lips pressed together. We're here to assess the situation, she replied smoothly. If what Jason has told you is true, then their current living situation is unsafe. That's our priority. Jason's chest tightened. Living situation. Unsafe. Words that could tear him and Gloria apart if he wasn't careful. I need to ask some questions, Betty continued. Jason, would you mind stepping outside with me for a moment? Jason's gaze darted to Gloria. Patrick caught the look. She stays with me, he said firmly. Jason didn't trust him, not fully, not yet. But right now, he was the only thing keeping Gloria safe. So Jason nodded. Outside, the morning air was crisp, edged with the scent of damp earth and city exhaust. Betty leaned against the porch railing, studying him in a way that made Jason's skin itch. You've been taking care of your sister for a while now, haven't you? Jason didn't answer. Betty sighed, flipping through her notes. Your mother, Isabella Ruiz, has a record. 3 prior arrests, Suspected substance abuse, reports of neglect. She glanced at him. "Jason, we need to find her." Jason looked away. "Do you know where she is?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. Betty exhaled slowly. "Look, I know you've had to grow up fast. I know you're used to handling things on your own, but this isn't something you can fix by yourself." Jason's fingers curled around the porch railing. "We need to confirm that you and Gloria are safe," she continued. "If your mother is unfit, we need to intervene." Jason bit the inside of his cheek. Safe. The word felt fragile, temporary. He had learned a long time ago that the moment you let someone decide what safe meant for you, they could take it away just as easily. But this wasn't about him. This was about Gloria. "She's at a house," he muttered. "I don't know who owns it. Some guy named Rico lets people crash there." Betty nodded. "Can you describe it?" Jason did. She jotted something down, then motioned to the officers. One of them spoke into his radio. Within seconds, the search was in motion. Jason's stomach churned. He had just handed his mother over. Betty turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "You did the right thing," she said. Jason wasn't sure he believed her. An hour passed. Jason sat on the porch steps, knees drawn to his chest, listening as the officers spoke into their radios, as Patrick exchanged quiet words with Betty inside. Then, sirens, doors slamming, voices sharp and urgent. Jason stood before he even realized he was moving. A police cruiser pulled up, an officer stepping out first, then another. Then, Isabella. Jason's stomach dropped. She looked worse than the last time he had seen her. Sunken cheeks, hollowed-out eyes, the kind of thin that came from addiction, not hunger. She wasn't screaming, wasn't fighting, just staring ahead, dazed, as they helped her out of the car. Keith's name had come up. He hadn't been there when they found Isabella, but the cops were looking. Jason clenched his fists. One of the officers turned toward Betty. "She was barely conscious when we found her. Passed out in one of the back rooms. No ID, no money, just a few old needles." Betty nodded, her expression grim. "She'll be processed. I'll arrange for a full assessment." Jason felt sick. Isabella lifted her head then. Her gaze landed on Jason. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Jason's heart twisted violently inside his chest. He wanted to be angry, to tell her that this was her fault, that she had done this, that she had left them. But standing there, looking at the wreckage of the person she used to be, all he felt was something bitter and unbearably empty. The officers led her away. Jason didn't move. A hand settled on his shoulder. He flinched, expecting Betty. But it was Patrick. Jason forced himself to breathe. Betty cleared her throat. "Jason," she said carefully, "I need to talk to you about what happens next." Jason looked at Gloria through the window, still asleep, still untouched by the world unraveling outside. He turned back to Betty, voice low. "What happens next," he said, "is that she stays with me." Betty's expression softened. "We'll see." Jason's hands balled into fists. He didn't want to wait and see, but for now, he had no choice. The morning passed in a blur of quiet voices and whispered reassurances. Gloria slept through most of it, curled up beneath the thick blankets Patrick had given her, while Jason sat near the window, his fingers gripping the edge of the couch as he watched the outside world shift. The police had left. Isabella was gone, and for the first time in Jason's life, there was nowhere he needed to be. It should have been comforting, but instead, it left him restless. Do you think Isabella deserves forgiveness? If yes, leave a comment, green. Otherwise, comment, red. By the afternoon, the house had settled into a strange, almost unnerving silence. Jason found himself wandering, not out of curiosity, but out of unease. The ceilings stretched impossibly high, the furniture sat untouched, and the hallways were too long, too quiet. Gloria, on the other hand, had found something to anchor herself to. Jason spotted her in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the plush carpet, eyes glued to the massive television mounted on the wall. The colors flashed across her face, illuminating her wide-eyed wonder as a cartoon character danced across the screen. It was a sight Jason had never seen before, her completely, unapologetically absorbed in something simple, something she didn't have to think about or be afraid of. At home, no, at the apartment, their television had been an old, flickering thing, barely working, the sound crackling more often than it didn't. And it had always been a battle. One wrong move, and Isabella would snap, demanding silence, demanding money, demanding something Jason could never give. But here, Gloria was allowed to just be a kid. Jason swallowed hard and turned away. Patrick found him in the kitchen, standing stiffly near the counter, hands shoved into the pockets of his too big jacket. "You don't have to stand there like a prisoner, you know," Patrick said, setting a glass down. Jason shrugged. "Not used to places like this." Patrick hummed in understanding as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Jason watched him. The way he moved, not with the rigid formality Jason expected from rich people, but with an ease that didn't make sense for someone who had so much. "You cook for yourself?" Jason blurted it out before he could stop himself. Patrick raised a brow. "What, you think I have people to do that for me?" Jason didn't answer, but Patrick chuckled anyway. "I do my own cooking," Patrick said, leaning against the counter. "Always have. Keeps me busy." Jason frowned. "Aren't you, like, old?" Patrick let out a bark of laughter. "Not old, just old enough." Jason hesitated. He didn't ask questions, not usually. Asking meant opening doors, and open doors meant expectations. But something about Patrick made him want to test the edges of that rule. "You live here alone?" Patrick's grip on his mug tightened just slightly before he exhaled. "Yeah, my daughter's grown. She's married and has her own life now." Jason glanced around at the too big house, the two empty spaces. "She doesn't visit?" Patrick sipped his coffee. "She does. Holidays, mostly. She's got her own family now, living in a different city. 1,000 miles away, give or take." He gave Jason a knowing look. "I see that look, kid. You think that means I'm lonely?" Jason hesitated. "Aren't you?" Patrick smiled faintly. "Lonely isn't the worst thing a man can be." Jason looked down, unsure what to say to that. Patrick didn't push. Instead, he took another sip of coffee before nodding toward the dining table. "Sit. Eat something before you start pacing again." Jason wanted to argue, to say that he wasn't pacing, that he wasn't restless, that he wasn't uncomfortable. But that would be a lie. So he sat. The food was warm, the kind that settled into the hollows of his stomach like something permanent. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Jason finally said it. "I don't want to owe you." Patrick didn't flinch, didn't look surprised, and didn't ask him to explain. He simply leaned back in his chair, studied Jason with a quiet kind of understanding, and said, "Then don't." Jason didn't know what to do with that. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater cycling on and off, filling the vast, empty spaces with a warmth Jason still wasn't used to. He sat on the couch, knees drawn up, staring at the television without really seeing it. Gloria sat a few feet away, completely enraptured by the cartoon dancing across the screen, her mouth slightly open in a quiet kind of wonder. Jason should have been relieved to see her like this, safe, happy, untouched by the storm that had been their life just days ago. Instead, he felt untethered. The only constant in his life had been survival. Now that the immediate danger was gone, now that Gloria had a soft place to sleep and food that didn't come in crumpled bills and desperate bargains, Jason felt like he was floating, waiting for the weight of the world to drop back onto his shoulders. His gaze drifted to Patrick, sitting a few feet away in an armchair, phone pressed to his ear. "I know, sweetheart," Patrick said, his voice softer than Jason had ever heard it. "I'm fine, I promise." Jason hadn't realized he was eavesdropping until he caught Patrick's smile, the rare kind, the kind that made his lined face soften. "Yes, I'll be careful. It's not like I'm out climbing mountains." A pause, a chuckle. "Oh, really? That's what you think?" Jason looked away, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a moment he had no right to witness. Patrick's daughter. It made sense. A man like Patrick, wealthy, self-sufficient, he had to have someone, right? Someone who worried about him. Someone who called just to check in, just to make sure he was okay. Jason didn't realize how long he had been staring until Patrick ended the call and turned to him. "My daughter," Patrick said, as if reading his mind. "She's coming home for Christmas." Jason nodded, but something bitter curled in his chest. Patrick must have noticed because he leaned back, studying him. "What about you, kid?" Jason frowned. "What about me?" Patrick set his phone down. "Do you ever think about your dad?" Jason froze. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he scoffed, forcing himself to relax. "Why would I?" Patrick didn't call him on the lie. Jason looked away, fingers curling against his knee. "Wayne Sanders," Jason added, forcing his voice to stay even. "He left when I was little. I never heard anything after that." Patrick exhaled. "Your mother never told you." Jason shook his head. She acted like he didn't exist. Patrick was silent for a moment, then said, "Do you want to know the truth?" Jason set his mug down carefully, heart pounding. "Yeah." Patrick nodded, as if he had expected that. "I can find out for you," he said simply, "if you want." Jason looked at him. "How?" Patrick tilted his head slightly, studying him. "I have people who can look into it. Private investigators." Jason blinked. The idea felt too big, too impossible, like digging up a ghost. But still, he nodded. "Okay." Days passed. Patrick made a few calls and sent a few emails. Jason didn't ask for updates. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what they would find. Then, one evening, Patrick called him into his study. Jason stepped inside, his pulse quickening. The room was lined with bookshelves, the scent of old paper and polished wood settling in the air. Patrick sat behind a heavy oak desk, his expression unreadable. Jason sat across from him, gripping the arms of the chair. "You found something." Patrick nodded, sliding a thin folder across the desk. "Wayne Sanders never left you." Jason's breath caught. Patrick's voice was steady. "He died in a hit-and-run accident 3 years ago." The words didn't make sense. Jason opened the folder, his hands trembling slightly. A police report, a photo of a totaled taxi cab. The name Wayne Sanders was printed neatly in black ink. His father hadn't left. He had died. Jason stared at the words, his chest tightening. "The police never found who did it," Patrick continued quietly. "The driver fled the scene. The case was left open, but eventually it just faded away." Jason swallowed hard. "You're sure?" Patrick nodded. "The records match. Wayne Sanders' taxi driver died on impact." Taxi driver. Jason had never known that. He had never known what his father did or where he went after he left. He had never even wondered. All this time, he had imagined his father choosing to walk away, building a new life somewhere else, forgetting about them. But that wasn't true. His father hadn't abandoned him. His father had never had the chance to come back. Why no one had told him, Jason whispered. "Does Gloria know?" Patrick shook his head. "Not unless your mother told her." Jason let out a breath. Of course she hadn't. Of course she had let them believe they had been left behind when the truth was so much worse. Something shifted inside him then, a crack in the foundation of everything he thought he had known. Patrick saw it. Saw the way Jason's fists clenched, the way his shoulders went stiff. "You okay, kid?" Jason didn't know how to answer that. so he just nodded, because what else was there to say? The next morning, Patrick was on the phone again, his tone clipped, his words deliberate. Jason sat at the kitchen counter, pretending not to listen as he pushed his eggs around on his plate. "Yeah," Patrick said. "I understand. Just send me what you have." A pause. "No, I don't care how long it's been. There has to be a file. You don't just let a case like that disappear." Jason's stomach twisted. He didn't need to ask to know what Patrick was talking about. Wayne Sanders, his father. The ghost Jason had buried in resentment and silence had turned into something much worse. Something real. Something stolen. Patrick hung up and exhaled, rubbing his temples. When he looked up, Jason stiffened, face to face with Patrick. "Your father never abandoned you and Gloria," Patrick said again, firm this time, like he needed Jason to hear it. "He sent money, every month, regular deposits, right up until he died." Jason's fingers curled against the edge of the counter. "To my mom?" Patrick nodded. Jason swallowed. So it hadn't just been that his mother lied. She had known. She had known all along that Wayne had been taking care of them in the only way he could. But instead of telling Jason, instead of telling Gloria, she had let them believe the worst. Jason forced himself to breathe evenly, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Patrick's voice was quieter when he spoke again. "The city confirmed it," he said. "Your mother came to identify his body. She handled the paperwork. She knew." Jason let out a breath through gritted teeth. She knew. All this time, he had imagined Wayne as someone who walked away, as someone who had chosen a new life, a different family, anything but them. But that had never been true. And Isabella had taken that truth away from him. Jason wasn't sure how long he sat there, staring at the wood grain of the counter. But when he finally spoke, his voice came out hollow. "Why would she do that?" Patrick sighed. "Maybe she thought she was protecting you." Jason scoffed. "Or maybe she was protecting herself," Patrick added. That felt more like the truth. Jason wanted to be angry. He wanted to hate her for it, for the years of silence, of making him believe something that wasn't real. But the truth was, it didn't change anything. His mother was still gone. His father was still dead. And no amount of anger would bring either of them back. Jason stood abruptly. "I need some air." Patrick didn't stop him. That night, Jason lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Gloria was curled up beside him, her breathing soft and steady. She had fallen asleep early, clutching one of the stuffed animals Patrick had bought for her. Jason turned onto his side, his mind racing. Wayne had never left. His mother had lied. And now, Patrick was fighting to reopen a case that had been forgotten. But Jason wasn't sure what scared him more, the truth or what would happen when they found it. The next morning, Patrick got another call. Jason sat across from him in the living room, hands gripping the fabric of his jeans as Patrick listened. Then Patrick's eyes hardened. "I need you to look into him," he said, voice low. "I don't care how long ago it was. Run his record again." Jason sat up. "What is it?" Patrick ended the call, setting the phone down. His face was unreadable. "The police dug up the old reports," Patrick said carefully. "There was something in the witness statements and camera from the night your father died." Jason's breath caught. Patrick hesitated. Keith's name came up. Keith Rivera. Jason's stomach dropped. Keith. The same Keith who had been in and out of their apartment for the past year. The same Keith who showed up when his mother needed money, who disappeared when things got messy, who always smelled like something rotten and stale. Jason shook his head. "Number that doesn't. He didn't even know my mum back then." Patrick's jaw tightened. Before they met, and he was there that night, near the scene of the accident. Jason's blood ran cold. Near the scene. Keith. His mind was spinning. Patrick exhaled. "It doesn't prove anything, but..." They have to look into it, Jason finished. Patrick nodded. Jason's heart was pounding. He thought back to every time Keith had come around, the way he never looked Jason in the eye, the way he lingered too long, spoke in half sentences, and always seemed to be watching, even when he wasn't talking. Had he known? Had he looked Jason in the face all this time, knowing what he had done? Jason's fists clenched. "Patrick," he said suddenly, "I want to see my mom." Patrick hesitated. "She lied to me," Jason said, voice flat. "I still want to see her." Patrick was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. The police station was colder than Jason expected. Patrick walked beside him, one hand resting lightly against his shoulder as they stepped inside. Betty was already waiting for them. "You're sure about this?" she asked. Jason nodded. Gloria was clutching his hand, shifting nervously on her feet. Patrick had tried to convince him to leave her behind, but Jason had refused. She deserved to see too. Betty exhaled. "Okay, but if she's in a bad state—" "I'll know," Jason cut in. She didn't argue. They led him into a small room, a table, 2 chairs. The air was heavy, stale. And then the door opened. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Isabella looked smaller than he remembered. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her skin pale, her shoulders drawn inward like she was bracing for a blow. For the first time in Jason's life, she looked fragile. She sat down across from him, staring. You came," she whispered. Jason swallowed hard. He had so many things he wanted to say, so many things he wanted to scream. But all that came out was, "Why?" Isabella blinked. "Why what?" Jason's hands clenched into fists. "Why did you lie to me?" She closed her eyes for a long moment, exhaling shakily. Then she opened them, and Jason saw something crack in her expression. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "I thought, if you believed he left, it would hurt less than knowing he was never coming back." Jason's chest ached. Gloria shifted beside him, confused. "Mom," she murmured. Isabella's gaze snapped to her, and for the first time in years, Jason saw something raw and real in his mother's eyes. Not anger, not desperation, just love. Jason didn't know if it was enough, but it was something. The detention center smelled of bleach and something stale, the kind of place where time moved slower, where the air was thick with quiet resignation. The harsh fluorescent lights flickered faintly above, casting everything in a cold, artificial glow. Jason sat stiffly in the waiting area, his hands clenched together, the edge of his nails digging into his palms. Patrick sat beside him, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Across from them, Betty stood near the door, watching carefully, her clipboard held loosely at her side. She had been visiting more often lately, dropping off books for Gloria, checking in on Jason without making it feel like an interrogation. She never pushed. That was what made Jason tolerate her. Right now she was quiet, letting Jason sit with his thoughts. "I don't know if I want to do this," Jason admitted suddenly. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. Patrick turned to him. "You don't have to." Jason shook his head. "I do." Patrick nodded once, understanding. A guard appeared then, motioning for them to follow. Betty stepped forward, her presence grounding, as if she knew Jason would need it. They walked down the narrow corridor, the sound of their footsteps bouncing against the concrete walls. Jason's breath felt shallow. He was used to seeing Isabella at her worst, high, screaming, stumbling through their apartment, her eyes glassy and unfocused. But today would be different. The visiting room was small, just a table and a few chairs. A large, smudged window sat behind the guard, stationed in the corner. The walls were bare, the overhead light buzzing faintly. Jason sat down first. Gloria climbed onto the chair beside him, fingers tangled in the hem of her sweater. Then the door on the opposite side opened. Isabella stepped in. Jason's stomach clenched. She looked smaller, thinner, but not in the way she had been when she was using. Her eyes were no longer clouded, no longer darting in a frantic search for something she couldn't have. They were clear, and when she looked at Jason, there was something in them he hadn't seen in years. Recognition. Love. Jason's breath hitched. She wasn't the same. Her hair was pulled back, showing the sharp angles of her face, the tired lines around her mouth. She had always been beautiful. When Jason was little, he remembered thinking she looked like the women on TV, the ones in old movies with bright eyes and easy smiles. But now, she looked older. Like every bad choice had left a scar only she could feel. She swallowed, her gaze moving slowly from Jason to Gloria. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, You came." Jason's jaw tightened. He wanted to be angry. He had been angry for so long, years of hunger, of loneliness, of protecting Gloria from the very person who should have been protecting them. But seeing her now, sober, present, fragile in a way he had never seen before, the anger wouldn't come. "Mom," Gloria whispered. Isabella flinched, her fingers curling against the table. Then she let out a shaky breath. "Hi, baby," she murmured. Gloria hesitated, her small hands fisting into Jason's sleeve. She was still scared. Jason didn't blame her. He forced himself to speak, his voice tight. "Why did you lie to us? About Dad and his death?" Isabella's gaze dropped to her lap. "I thought I was protecting you," Jason scoffed. "By letting us believe he abandoned us." She flinched. By making Gloria think he just left and forget his children." His voice cracked at the end. Isabella's shoulders trembled. When she looked back up, her eyes were wet, but no tears fell. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered. "You were so small, Jason. I thought—" She exhaled, shaking her head. "I thought if you were angry at him, at least you wouldn't have to grieve him." Jason's fists clenched against his knees. "That wasn't your choice to make." She nodded. "I know." For the first time, she didn't make excuses. For the first time, she just sat there, taking in the weight of what she had done. Jason hated how much that hurt. A long silence stretched between them. Then Patrick leaned forward. His voice was steady, but firm. "Isabella," he said. "I spoke to the judge." She turned to him, confused. "You don't have to go to prison." Her breath caught. Jason's fingers twitched. "There's a rehab program," Patrick continued. "They're willing to take you, if you want it." Isabella sat frozen. Jason didn't look away. He watched every flicker of emotion that passed through her face, fear, hesitation, disbelief. Then her lips parted. "I'll do it." Jason exhaled, something in his chest loosening just slightly. Patrick nodded, as if he had already known she would say that. "Then I'll take care of them while you get better." Isabella's lower lip trembled. You would do that?" Patrick met her gaze. "I already am." She swallowed hard. Jason didn't know what he was supposed to feel in this moment. Relief? Hope? Instead, all he felt was exhausted. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a promise of things being okay. But it was a choice, and this time, Isabella was choosing them. That evening, Jason sat on the front steps of Patrick's house, staring out into the quiet night. The air was crisp, the wind carrying the distant sound of a car horn from the street below. The door creaked behind him. Patrick stepped outside, taking a seat beside him. He didn't say anything at first, just sat, letting the silence settle. Jason cleared his throat. "She's really going to do it?" Patrick nodded. "Seems like it." Jason let out a breath, rubbing his hands together. "She always used to say she'd get better. he admitted. Always promised, but then never did. Patrick glanced at him. And now? Jason hesitated. Now, I don't know. Patrick didn't push, didn't tell him what to feel. He just exhaled. You don't have to forgive her today, kid. Jason swallowed hard. But you don't have to carry all of it alone, either. Jason stared down at his hands. For so long, it had been just him and Gloria against the world. But now, there was Patrick. There was Betty, who kept showing up with books for Gloria, who never looked at Jason like he was just another case file. There was a world outside of surviving. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let himself believe in it. 1 year later. The world had changed, but it hadn't stopped. The streets still bustled with impatient cars, the sidewalk still hummed with hurried footsteps, and the city carried on, indifferent to the lives within it. But for Jason, everything felt different. Patrick's house no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It had become home, a place where mornings weren't just about survival, where warmth wasn't something that had to be earned, and where Gloria laughed more than she cried. And Isabella, she had kept her promise. The rehab center was small, tucked away from the main roads, a quiet place meant for healing. Jason stood at the entrance, hands shoved in his pockets, staring at the glass doors. He hadn't seen her in months, not since the last visit, when she had looked better, clearer, more like the mother he barely remembered. Patrick stood beside him, patient as ever. Gloria, holding a new book Betty had given her, fidgeted beside him. "Are you ready, kid?" Patrick asked. Jason swallowed. "Yeah." They stepped inside. Isabella sat in the common area, a cup of tea in her hands, her face thinner but healthier. She no longer had that hollow look, that edge of desperation clinging to her like a second skin. She turned when she saw them, her breath catching. "Jason." Gloria hesitated, but then she ran to her, burying her face against Isabella's side. Isabella's arms wrapped around her tightly, like she never wanted to let go. Jason stood a few feet away, watching. He still didn't know how to bridge this gap between them. But then Isabella looked at him, and for the first time, he didn't see a stranger. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Jason shifted on his feet. "You look better." She smiled, small but real. "I am." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not suffocating, and then Patrick cleared his throat. "We have something else to tell you." Isabella frowned. "What is it?" Jason glanced at Patrick, who nodded for him to speak. Jason exhaled. "Keith got arrested." Isabella's face went pale. "They found proof," Jason continued. "He was there the night Dad died. He was the driver." The words landed like a blow, knocking the air out of the room. Isabella stiffened, her hands tightening on Gloria's shoulders. They know for sure," she whispered. Jason nodded. Security footage, witness statements. He was high that night, hit Dad's taxi and left him there. A sharp breath left her. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. For so long, Wayne's death had been a mystery, a wound left to fester in silence. But now, there was a name. There was justice. Keith would never walk free again. Isabella felt a pang of pain. She had been with Wayne's killer. She felt disgusted with herself. Isabella whispered, "And yet I was with that guy." Patrick reached out, resting a firm hand on Jason's shoulder. "It's over." Jason swallowed, the weight of it all settling deep in his chest. Yeah, it was over. For the first time, Jason wasn't carrying everything alone. A few weeks later, the courtroom was silent as the judge read the final decision. Jason sat beside Patrick, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. Isabella sat across from them, a tension in her shoulders, her fingers clenched together. The words granted full custody echoed through the room. Isabella sucked in a breath, eyes glistening. She turned to Jason, hesitation and hope written across her face. But Jason didn't feel fear. He felt choice. For the first time in his life, there was a choice. Isabella had changed. She had worked for this, earned this. But he wasn't the same boy who had once clung to the idea of a mother who would save them. He had Patrick. He had Betty. He had a life. So Jason met her gaze and said, voice steady, "We'll figure it out, together." And for the first time, Isabella smiled without sadness. The sky was clear, the early summer air warm but not unbearable. The streets buzzed with life, kids on bicycles, families heading to restaurants, stores displaying signs with sales for Father's Day. Jason walked with slow, deliberate steps, a small bouquet clutched in his hand. He wasn't used to doing things like this. The weight of it felt unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. Gloria trotted beside him, humming a quiet tune, her little fingers wrapped around the strap of a book bag Betty had given her last week. She had picked out a new book this morning, one she was excited to show Patrick. Jason could already imagine Patrick shaking his head, acting annoyed about how many books Betty kept bringing, even though he never actually complained. The house was just ahead. Patrick's house. Their home, even if Jason had never said it out loud. He adjusted his grip on the bouquet, hesitating for a second before pushing forward. The front door was already open when they reached it. Patrick stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them approach with an expression Jason couldn't quite place. "What's this?" Patrick asked, his voice gruff but amused as his eyes flickered to the flowers in Jason's hand. Jason swallowed. He had planned to just hand them over quickly, get it over with, maybe mumble something, and pretend it wasn't a big deal. But standing here, in front of Patrick, this man who had never once treated him like a burden, who had given him and Gloria a home when they had none, Jason felt his throat tighten. He held out the flowers, his voice quiet but steady. "Happy Father's Day." Patrick's expression shifted. His jaw tightened, his lips pressing together. He took the bouquet carefully, like it was something delicate, like he didn't quite trust himself to hold it. For a moment, he didn't speak. Jason shifted awkwardly, about to say something stupid to fill the silence, when Patrick cleared his throat. "Well," Patrick said, his voice rough, "I never got flowers before." Gloria giggled beside him. "I picked them." Patrick looked down at her, softening just slightly. "You did, huh?" She nodded enthusiastically. Jason paid, though. Patrick turned back to Jason, studying him. Jason looked away, suddenly feeling self-conscious and exposed. Patrick exhaled, shaking his head. "You know, kid," he muttered, "you're going to make an old man emotional." Jason huffed a laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. "Didn't mean to." Patrick just looked at him, really looked at him, like he was trying to commit this moment to memory. Then, in a voice lower and quieter than before, Patrick said, "Thank you." Jason glanced at him, then away. His chest felt warm in a way he wasn't used to. Betty's car pulled up then, saving him from having to respond. She stepped out, holding a small gift bag. "Looks like I made it just in time," she teased, smiling as she walked toward them. Patrick rolled his eyes. "If that's another book, I'm throwing it in the fireplace." Betty smirked. "That's why I brought two." Gloria gasped dramatically. "No, not the books!" Jason let out a small chuckle, the tension in his shoulders easing. Patrick muttered something about being outnumbered in his own house, but didn't actually seem to mind. Jason stood there, watching them, watching this. Patrick grumbling but smiling as Gloria held up her new books. Betty, shaking her head, was amused. The warm glow of the porch light spills out onto the steps. For so long, Jason had believed family was something you were born into. But now, he knew better. Family wasn't just blood. It was a choice. And this was his. If this film touches your heart, leave your mark with a like And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to explore more meaningful stories with us. And if you enjoyed this story, please share it with your friends on WhatsApp. And now, share your feelings with us and tell us your own stories. Every word you share is a building block that helps create our strong and enduring community. Together, we'll create a warm space where everyone can share and connect. Finally, don't miss the incredible stories coming your way soon. We're always here to bring you the best selections, full of deep values, yet entertaining. See you there.